Good twilight, and welcome to Richard and Karl present Deep Space and Dragons. I'm probably Richard. It's been a long week.
I am definitely Karl. Although, I mean, you got to be careful about the Twilight Zone because you never know.
I mean, it was a great idea with mixed execution. And with that, today we're going to be talking Legend of Zelda, because somehow we've missed that episode. But first, what's new in the land of Karul?
Land of Karul. Because time is non-linear, by the time our listeners hear this episode, I'll probably have already gone on my date. But
Ooh.
I have a date tomorrow, so that's pretty interesting. You know, we're gonna go to the old spaghetti factory, and then we're gonna go watch the new Batman movie with Robert Pattinson. I have high hopes for it because he's played a vampire before, and they are creatures of the night. So I'm hoping that skill will transfer over nicely to his Batman powers.
I have to put this out there. The way you described this most definitely sounds like you're taking Robert Pattinson to the old spaghetti factory and watching the movie with them, and that is my headcanon, and I'm sticking to it. Like, there was no space. It's like, first we're going to go to the spaghetti factory, watch the Batman, and Robert Pattinson is like smooth. Perfect. So,
what's new with you, Richard?
So it was reading week at school, but you see, not only do I learn at this institution, I also work at this institution, and reading week's only a break for students, but employees get a massive workload spike. And don't get me wrong, my student job is probably the best job I've ever worked because they treat me like a human being, they use my name in conversations, and when I said my cat was sick, they asked for pictures and sent best wishes.
Ooh.
So, all in all, shout out to anyone who's in my Task Force Plus team who is listening to this podcast. And please ignore any swearing or questionable statements I make and don't tell my boss about them. Unless you are my boss, in which case, if you've made it this many episodes in, good job. So, with that underway, I made an interactive novel, I edited Charles Dickens into modern literature, I gave a tour of a new expansion building, I had like 30 MS Teams meetings this week. Only mild inflation of the numbers. Also, I'm counting this, so that might be cheating.
Well, yeah, we're not on Microsoft Teams.
Well, maybe we should get on their level. With that. Alright, so I hope your date with a sparkly vampire turned man who dresses like a bat, which, quite frankly, seems like the most rational role transition ever. Like, people are like, do we really want the sparkly goth vampire to play the sparkly goth billionaire who dresses like a bat? I'm like, yes! They're the same character.
They pretty much are.
And quite frankly, do not bash the actor who needs to put food on their table for accepting a three movie trilogy deal, because you'd have to be insane.
It's the new Batman movie is another trilogy?
Oh no, I was saying that I don't begrudge him for choosing to work Twilight, but I have to assume the new Batman movie will have at least 3.
Yeah.
That
probably
is the trend. The only person who only got 1 was Adam West.
Well, and George Clooney.
So, Legend of Zelda. Alright, let's start off with the obvious one. Did you play the original Legend of Zelda?
I did, actually. The original Legend of Zelda. It's dangerous to go out alone. And then he sends him out alone, but with a sword.
I mean, that is just good. Like, so I do a lot of helping people edit their fantasy novels and fiction, and I gotta say, out of everything I've said, that is the cleanest intro. It's dangerous to go alone, takes this sword, boom, you're in the story.
Well, I mean, most of the story actually takes place in the owner's manual because...
Oh yeah, we used to have those. I remember reading them in the back of a car on the way home. Good times.
Yeah, because they actually had relevant information about the game and what you were supposed to do. And if you didn't read them, the games were actually significantly more difficult.
And it's also on a really random, not at all related tangent. So for PlayStation 1, I had this awesome Digimon card battle game. did not age well. But in the manual, they physically hid in passcodes hidden in the manual's background art to get a few extra cards.
just to see if people are actually reading the game manual.
Like, you gotta respect that. But yeah, on to the topic of Zelda 1. So, we had an NES, but I would have been like 2 or 3 or 4. But I did play the original Legend of Zelda on it. And it is a fantastic game. However, I did not beat the original Legend of Zelda until I was playing it on the Switch's NES emulator, because the original Legend of Zelda is better when you can rewind time.
Well, I mean, games, to some degree, have gotten much easier.
Well, it's much easier and more... So, it used to be the best way to make your video game last longer was to send people back to the start when they died. But now, because we can make... Well, the original Legend of Zelda can probably fit on a contact lens now. Games have started being like, okay, we don't like punishing people who've lost time, because that's a cruel way to punish them. Or you make Dark Souls where you specifically punish them with lost time, and they have to go get their stuff back. But in the original Legend of Zelda, being able to like rewind a few frames in my brain was actually very flavorful for the type of game it was, because I'm like, oh yeah, just play the Song of Time and rewind it, it's fine. But the game itself blows my mind to this day that it's mostly open world and you can play it incredibly non-linearly.
Yeah, you can pretty much do any dungeon in any order you want. I mean, there's a few key items that you actually have to get to be able to progress, but I think it's like 6 out of 8 dungeons you can do in any sequence.
And what's really interesting, too, is if you get fed up and leave a dungeon, your keys are almost cross-transmittable, so you can just go do something else for a while and come back. And, the Zelda randomizer community is pretty huge. That just kind of puts items in places where other items could be. But the original Legend of Zelda was fantastic. But to move along this journey, so we don't end up giving them 72 hours of content, Zelda 2...
Okay, one quick point I want to make.
Of course.
I'm fairly certain, if you know it better, you can correct me, but... the original Legend of Zelda was the first NES game that was able to save.
I wish I knew if that was true, because in my brain that makes perfect sense. Mario didn't save, Mega Man used passwords, so I don't know if it's the first, but it has to be pretty early. That feels like a fair claim to make.
I'm pretty certain. I don't, like I said, I could be wrong. Maybe there's some other more obscure game that beat them to the punch, but I'm pretty sure Zelda was the first game that had a save feature for the NES at the very least.
And I even say in lots of newer Zelda games that Zelda's non-linear approach to the dungeons would have been an improvement on many of the future games that came down the line. But let's move. Are we ready to move on to Zelda 2? And did you play it?
I did play it. I don't think I've ever really gotten super far. I mean, I've gotten a couple spells, but Zelda 2 is significantly different than Zelda 1.
Yes, my most recent Zelda 2 experience comes from last night when I was playing Zelda 2. And the problem with Zelda 2 is that Zelda 1 is such a clean and elegant format, and Zelda 2 is this completely different beast. And I see what they're going for, but other games are better Zelda 2s, but I don't think I've found many games that are better Zelda 1s. The Shovel Knight is a better Zelda 2 in a lot of regards. Because at the very least you can pogo off people's heads and do your whole Metroidvania thing. Because Zelda 2 is closer to a Metroidvania in a way than it was to Zelda 1. In a really weird way. I really hope I get 100 comments about what is wrong with you, saying Zelda 2 was the first Metroidvania on the system that had Metroid and Castlevania.
Well, I mean, it was definitely because you have the overworld map where you go and explore the overworld, but then the actual battles and dungeons are the side-scrolling platformers, basically.
Yeah, and then
Well, it's just I could definitely see how you would think, like, it's not exactly Mario, but it's not exactly Metroid.
But to move this journey along a bit, so I'll briefly stop at the Game Boy game Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is fantastic. It is amazing. I would definitely spend $4 to $5 on it. And now let's move along. So next we get to A Link to the Past, a game engine so polished that if they re-released a new game with those same graphics and gameplay, called Four Swords Adventure for Switch, I would give them $80 on the spot.
Ooh, yeah.
Like,
the original Four Swords Adventure was like this bizarre cross between the Wind Waker art style and the Link to the Past art style, which I think it really worked. But sticking to the topic at hand, a Link to the Past is like definitely a very polished and refined game. Probably empirically better than the first one, the first Zelda in every way, except that the dungeons are not. You have to do them sequentially.
yes, and there's been countless mods for A Link to the Past because it's not that it's mod friendly, it's that people are dedicated. And people like to do things like randomizer races and randomizer runs where each box will contain a different item, changing the sequence of the game. And I did see one mod where someone did straight up mod it to be that you can do the dungeons in any order. But the thing about that is, as much as I think that would improve the game if you had that freedom of exploration, they added dialogue, they added quest lines, they added NPCs, they have graphics that hold up to this day, they had a great soundtrack, they had running shoes. Oh, running shoes. And it was just a truly good game. The thing is, you get to the end of it, and at the time, for a top-down exploration game like that, you're like, oh, yeah, I got the things and the sword and fought the boss and beat it, woo! And then just kicks you into a parallel reality map that they teased earlier. And it's like, oh, wow. Like, you guys just put in a second game here after I beat the first one.
Yeah. I first time I played through it, I was like, oh, this game doesn't seem that long. And then it's like, oh, now I'm a bunny.
And it's like, and here's your 8 dungeons. I'm like, oh, it started. That was the prelude. Oh, I see what just happened. So, the reason I made the Four Swords comment partly is, so I had this game on Game Boy Advance, not even DS, wow. On Game Boy Advance. And you could link cable it to play the OG Four Swords. Yeah, and the OG Four Swords was a great proof of concept of, hey, want to play Zelda 4 players and throw each other into lava pits? Which is just peak game innovation, and I do not know why they abandoned that. Because it was peak game innovation.
Right.
But A Link to the Past itself was also on there, and it's like, yeah, no, that is where 2D Zelda peaked. There's all sorts of, like, Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages, Phantom Hourglasses and Minish Caps, but nothing has actually been better for a top-down 2D Zelda game than Link to the Past.
Well, I mean, they've all basically, like, that has become the golden standard for the top-down Zelda games. So they've all kind of, like, they add their own items, but, like, aside from, say, A Link Between Worlds, which uses the exact same map, but then adds the cool, like, go into the wall as a painting mechanic.
But even that game was smaller in scope somehow.
I mean, I don't know. It was also ambitious in that, like, that one they did allow you to do the temples in any order because you just could buy all the items from the item shop that you needed to go do the temples.
It was an interesting. They had some ideas. Like, I never try and stop innovation. One thing Nintendo is notoriously bad for, and a lot of studios are bad for this, is not failing forward. I even wrote a paper on this in competitive leadership class earlier this year. If you fail, a lot of people be like, okay, this thing has failed, it's bad, and they cross it out. But what you need to do is break down what aspects failed and take the good ideas forward. The Digimon video game franchise, every time their game failed, they just deleted it completely and just started with a brand new game engine from scratch. And then your games don't actually get better. They're just completely different. Zelda games are consistent enough that none felt like outright fails, so they didn't really scrap very many ideas whole with, like, just the giant brush of death.
Well, except for Zelda 2.
Zelda 2 definitely just got... But Zelda 2 was weirdly an example of not succeeding forward. Like, they took nothing that worked in Zelda 1 and kept it, and I'm not really sure the thought process that went behind that decision. Like, where they developed simultaneously and released separately. Who decided, hey, this game that's the greatest hits and one of our best games ever made, let's do something so different that we don't even reuse a single asset from it? But I digress. Moving along the timeline, Zelda Ocarina of Time. Meh.
Well, I mean, it is regarded as one of like the best Zelda games that are ever made, and that one, the N64 allowed that to actually be a technical marvel with the lighting and real time shadows that they were able to do. It was like the first game of its kind that had like realistic shadows.
I enjoy what I say meh to a game that's been rated on numerous lists to be the best or the most influential video game of all time. And I mean, it's true.
I agree. It is a technical marvel, but being influential and popular doesn't necessarily actually make it a great game. And I think it was limited by the fact that it was, the first foray into 3D with a system that had a janky controller.
Yeah, I firmly disagree, weirdly. So Ocarina of a lot of 3D games, when we talk about on this list, we're like, yeah, Super Mario World was better in Super Mario 64 in a lot of ways. If you ignore the 2D, like if you take the hypothetical, let's take both these games, switch them to 2D, which has more content, better puzzles, better interactions. Ocarina of Time had adequate dialogue, as for most games at that time. We weren't really making good Final Fantasy plots except for in Final Fantasies yet. But it had about 20 dungeons. There's like the 6 main ones, 3 small ones, and like 3 side ones. So I guess like 12? But if you look at it side by side to A Link to the Past, despite having to use new technology to make this game, it didn't have less puzzles. It didn't have less dungeons. It didn't have a smaller variety of enemies. They used every tool they had, and unlike a lot of 3D games, which was just a 2D with a third dimension, a lot of the puzzles in Ocarina of Time actually wove the new technology into the gameplay seamlessly. Think about that you had a shield that you used to reflect beams of light to hit targets. They didn't have a lighting engine before they made this game. The idea that you could reflect a light source in a three-dimensional space didn't exist, and they used it as a boss fighting mechanic.
Well, I mean, like I said, Ocarina of Time is a technical marvel, but I'm just not a fan of the N64.
The thing
and also, like the PlayStation, I believe the PlayStation 1 or maybe even was the original PlayStation had a controller that had dual analog sticks. I
will say, Ocarina of Time. So I had Ocarina of Time for GameCube in the Ocarina of Time Master Quest Double Disc, and that is where a lot of my Ocarina of Time playthrough came from, was with a GameCube controller. Which
I mean that's just a superior way to play the game.
But I'm going to say that if you look at Ocarina of Time and hold it next to Twilight Princess, despite being on better tech, Twilight Princess wasn't a better game. Its puzzles weren't as clever, its fights weren't as intricate, there was less to explore, less to do. Because Ocarina of Time had that you explore the game, and then you go into the future, and then you jump back and forth and watch how your effects ricochet through time, is a mind-blowing concept, 3D blocky graphics notwithstanding. Like, that done in any graphics is impressive from a narrative standpoint. If you meet all these characters as kids, get thrown into this dystopia, and then have to fix the dystopia to go back and make it back into a utopia, is interesting.
Well, you're pretty strongly defending a game that you just rated as meh.
Yeah, that's because immediately after it, they just made a straight-up better one that no one ever talks about.
you think Majora's Mask is straight up better?
So Majora's,
I conceptually, I love the idea of you get to the end of 72 hours and you have to reset the day every time you reset the time every time you fail. But like,
but it comes together so nicely. Here's the thing about Majora's Mask, and why I'll defend it to the grave. So it had less dungeons than Ocarina of Time. It had less boss battles. But every NPC had a life. In those 72 hours, you could literally stalk one NPC and watch them live 3 days of their life. So in the 50 or so NPCs in this game, they're living their lives. And as you go through the game and quest lines, and things start to piece together, you hit a point where you're like, okay, I had to break a curse on somebody to get them the thing to save their wedding. And once you start getting a hang of who does what, when, and there, and the pieces start clicking, because the actual game of beat the temples, fight the boss isn't what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to collect all 50 masks and fight the actual boss.
Right.
And the fact that they actually made such a good example of nonlinear storytelling, where when you talk to one character, it would interact with the next character said based on when you did things in the timeline. Like, there's a scene where if you don't stop the moon crashing and you're in a bar with Marin and her younger sister, you watch them contemplating their doom as death's approaching, as they spend their last moments getting drunk waiting for the apocalypse, because you did nothing to stop this. Or there's
okay, but
like,
see, my counterpoint is that, like, at the start you get turned into a Deku Kid, right? And they're like, okay, go back and get your ocarina within 72 hours.
Yeah, to start the game.
Yeah, they start the game. And then it's like, okay, that's my quest. And all of these other quests that were actually part of completing that quest, I was just like, they were unrelated to my actual quest. It was like, you go and you talk to the kids that are blocking the way to the observatory. And it's like, okay, well, that'll be a side quest for later. I got to focus on finding my ocarina. It was like, nope, you gotta actually get your way to the observatory to get this moon tier. And then it's like, okay, well, what do I do with this moon tier? Oh, well, apparently I have to trade it to this guy for the deed to his flower. It's like, what? How was I supposed to know that? Like,
see, the thing is, the first loop is a little esoteric because it's the first loop. But once you get through the first loop, most of those characters end up coming back, and they're actually trying to tell a different story with it.
I just found that the first loop was so tedious and not... The first loop is just really messy. And it really turned me off of the whole game because nothing really felt connected. And I mean, it sounds like it does bring itself together to tell a beautiful non-linear story of how your choices affect the people as they live their 3 days of their life. But
well, moving on from the Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask debate, because I loved a lot of the new ideas they tried for Majora's Mask. Ocarina of Time is a golden standard for a reason, though. This is like one of those... Oh, go ahead.
I definitely, like I say, I really do appreciate the concepts and ideas that went into Majora's Mask, and I feel like they did keep a lot of the things that worked from Ocarina of Time, and tried to do something that was new and innovative,
it's kind of funny
because... That's not something we can say about a lot of newer entries into the franchise.
Yeah, to directly follow on that and the idea of failing forward, Majora's Mask was not as much of a success as they wanted it to be. So when we get to Twilight Princess, they just did Ocarina of Time again, but darker. And not darker in tone or darker in writing. No, darker because they implemented large amounts of bloom lighting and industrial amounts of shadow effects. So my problem with Twilight Princess is when I first played it on Wii, I hate motion controls. So once I got a GameCube copy of it, that already made the game 80% better. Because if you're trying to really immerse yourself in a game, flailing your arm for like 6 hours at a time is just not good gameplay. I'm fine with motion controls, with friends playing Wii Sports, but for actually trying to like relax and unwind, by trying to make it more hands-on, you make it less immersive, because then you're paying attention to your hands instead of what's in front of your face. But the thing about Twilight Princess is I think it was their least ambitious Zelda game ever made. Almost every temple is just a rehash of the temple idea from Ocarina of Time. There was no heel turn moment. So when you make it through Ocarina of Time's halfway point. They didn't have a heel turn moment in Majora's Mask either, but that game was drastically structured different.
Right.
In Twilight Princess, instead of your heel turn moment of, and now you unlock the other part of the game, you unlock the other part of the game, but not really. Because you collect the first 4 MacGuffins, and then your MacGuffins get stolen, then you have to collect the other 2 MacGuffins. But instead of it opening a new way to explore the game, like A Link to the Past giving you a mirror that lets you let it go into another world, or Ocarina of Time letting you travel back and forth through time, instead, you just know that there's a Twilight world, but you don't get to actually explore it. It's just kind of there. You've actually gotten rid of it by doing the wolf quests. And it's like they never actually had anyone playtest the wolf segments where you just walk around and dig up bugs, because that makes up like a quarter of your gameplay time of Twilight Princess. Or like you get this cool giant glowing Master Sword, and then that's the last time you ever go to the Twilight, so you don't even get to like get Vindication with it. Or like the wolf.
I definitely agree. The Twilight Princess was the least ambitious, but it was followed up by Skyward Sword, right? So like,
which is, in my opinion, the worst Zelda game, except maybe Zelda 2.
Well, I mean, it was ambitious though.
Skyward Sword?
To some degree.
No.
Like
firmly disagree.
That's where they started introducing like the stamina bar, and then they had like the flying sections and.
No, still firmly disagree. So, first off, adding in a stamina bar is not a gaming innovation since... Loading. I think the first game I played that used the stamina bar for your running was, like, on the PS2. Like one of the Grand Theft Autos or something. And the thing is, the stamina bar in Breath of the Wild was innovative because you could climb any surface. In Skyward Sword, it just capped your running speed. So you added in a mechanic that made you physically move slower. It had the fewest dungeons, it had no heel turn moment, it had a horribly underutilized time mechanic, which was like, well, it's like Ocarina of Time, but instead of you talking to characters before and after, it just makes a room look different. It tripled down on motion controls. Most of the battles resulted in you having to just do, to the point where they had to map the motion controls on an analog stick. But the fact you could map it on analog sticks means they were a lie. And it just was not a good Zelda game. It is the first Zelda game I picked up and just kind of gave up halfway through because it just wasn't doing it for me. The flying sections were less innovative than playing Star Fox 64. Because there was nothing there.
I can definitely see your complaints, and I never actually did finish the game because it was extremely hand-holdy. Like like instead of letting you figure out any of the puzzles, it was basically just like, hey, go here.
But to loop back around to failing
much more
forward
linear than anything else.
Is Wind Waker got some weird reviews because people were like, oh, I don't like the cartoony graphics, so they just made Ocarina of Time but darker. Wind Waker might dethrone Ocarina of Time sometimes. It was a really innovative game that had some really cool ideas.
Oh yeah, we definitely. Sorry for our viewers. We definitely skipped over Wind Waker because that came out before Twilight Princess.
It's less that we skipped it over and more Twilight Princess made more sense to discuss after Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask because it was just Ocarina of Time with a facelift. Like, you didn't get to play as a young person. You could turn into a doggo sometimes. But at its core, it was Water Temple, Forest Temple, Ice Temple. Collect them, fight evil Ganon's puppet, fight Ganon, GG. And we replaced Navi with a weirdly, questionably fan-arted character. But, moving on to Wind Waker. Wind Waker, by far, had the graphics aged the best, except maybe A Link to the Past. And that is debatable. Because they killed it with those graphics. And at the time, a lot of people were being like, just turning old enough to be like, I can buy Grand Theft Auto now. I don't need this kiddie Zelda game. Like, you fools. Look how expressive he is. Look how good these graphics are. What is wrong with you? And the fact that they made the seamless open world by having the boat move at exactly the speed the game loaded, so it looked like you could just keep going across an infinite ocean. Games today haven't quite figured that out. The new Pokemon game didn't even figure that one out, and has separate zones. And that's, what, a solid decade later? They're like, yeah, loading zones. Sure. making a seamless open world run cleanly is hard.
Yeah.
So Wind Waker,
That's true.
I guess I'll turn it for you because I just went on a full tangent. Wind Waker, thoughts?
Well, I mean, I absolutely love the art direction of Wind Waker, and like it's the open exploration of the seas is definitely one of the more interesting ways to do the open world with all the different islands, and I loved going around and exploring, trying to fill in the map, talk to the fish that like paint your little map on there, and then trying to figure out what their hints were. Like I felt there were times when it felt a little bit too linear, whereas like you could go and explore and find something, but you wouldn't be able to do anything there for like half the game. But besides that, I really did enjoy Wind Waker a lot.
And to follow up on another Zelda game for the GameCube that doesn't get enough love, Four Swords Adventure. How could I put this? The one-player campaign where you micromanage 4 links. It's like, okay, it's kind of like A Link to the Past, but instead of open world, you're doing it in set levels. This is an okay game. And yeah, the one-player mode is a solid, okay game. But the idea of a Zelda game where you can eat each other at your enemies, that you have a score bar and you're competing while working together, that there's a versus mode where I could run Karl over on a horse. That is beauty. That is gaming perfection. There's something deeply satisfying about working together to kill a Hydra and then murdering each other in a fire pit afterward.
Well, and then there was the like people don't like Nintendo for having like way too many peripherals, but the seamless integration of the hardware between the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube, where you could go into a cave and it would be like a side-scrolling Mario game, and where you'd even have the fish from Mario, or I think there was probably like a mushroom or something hidden in there too, like little Easter eggs from Mario in the side-scrolling platforming sections. But then go back out into the open world.
Back on the TV, entering a cave to go on a Game Boy, and then going back onto the TV is the only time I've seen the Game Boy The only time I've ever seen that technology, if you have your own screen and you have a share screen in the middle, ever actually used well. Because, in the Versus mode, I could hide from Karl in a cave around the corner of a bow drawn, and he couldn't see where exactly I was hiding in the cave until he went in to find out for himself. Or that you could, hit someone out of the cave onto the TV.
Just as a little tangent here, The Wii U, the Nintendo Land that was packaged with it, I loved Nintendo Land, and I really do think they did actually utilize the second screen quite well. But that's also a much more dedicated hardware for that exact thing. And there weren't very many games for the Wii U that actually ended up using the second screen effectively either.
I agree. But man, Zelda 4 Swords, if it was just on this... Here's what they do. They release it exactly as it is. You don't even have to graphically upgrade it. It works great. They combine Wind Waker's graphics with Link to the Past graphics. You win. Game over. GG.
Right.
And all they do is you buy one copy for $80, and then 3 of your friends can click the download play function, and then you just play it, each with your own Switch. Boom. Done. Perfect. Works exactly the same way it used to. And then you have a flawless gaming experience. Or hell, with our current technology, you could just put a URL in on your phone and come play with that. Jackbox Games does it.
It could make the Nintendo Switch app actually useful.
Oh, wow. And with that, we get to the end of our journey with only one more Zelda game left to discuss. Zelda Hyrule Warriors. I'm kidding, it's Breath of the Wild. Of course it's Breath of the Wild.
Well, okay, I mean, for all of the discussions that we've had about Zelda, we haven't really talked about the fact that the Zelda timeline is a huge mess. I'm going to stop you right there, my co-host. We do not have the visual charts needed. If we're doing this, we're going to have to do a full 1-hour video with scripts, laser pointers, and diagrams. Because the Zelda timeline, let me explain what happened here in non-timeline terms. These games were not written with plots that were designed to connect. And then one guy at Nintendo thought, it'd be funny if I released an official timeline for how these things connect.
that it doesn't work. That's like when we said Dune is a Star Wars movie. We can make it work, but it was never designed to work.
My point here is that I watched a theory video about how Hyrule Warriors is the connection, the nexus of all the timelines. I wasn't going to go into how
that was the actual plot of Hyrule Warriors.
But the actual plot of Hyrule Warriors is that it is the nexus of all the Zelda timelines.
Actually,
I mean, we're gonna breeze over it because it's a Warriors game, but
I mean, actually, Zelda Warriors had some interesting parts to it. We'll slow down a bit and go Warriors. First off, the actual canonical plot of Hyrule Warriors is a Link fangirl in the future who's also a goddess, is so into Link they got split personality syndrome, split into two beings while one tries to abduct Link and the other one just watches lovingly from the sideline. That is the canonical plot of Hyrule Warriors. As a Warriors game, for our viewers who may not have been subjected to one, they are those button mashers where you kill hundreds of enemies and are best enjoyed with a 6-pack of lemonade at 3 in the morning while chatting with your friends. The game is just there to keep part of your brain busy, because you can have a fully functioning debate on quantum physics and not lose out on any of what you're doing in Hyrule Warriors. However, to make it more Zelda-y, they have this mode where they put in the maps from like mainline Zelda games and you move square by square unlocking power-ups to explore the map. And that was actually kind of cool. Like, as far as Warrior games go, Hyrule Warriors is probably the best one.
But yeah, I mean, I think it is worth mentioning just because of the plot and how it ultimately becomes the nexus of all the timelines.
But yeah, like
not going into too much detail because it's...
Yeah, but I stand by my statement that you can go an amazing deep dive on how all these stories are connected, but they're never designed to be. And much like building a car out of cardboard, I'm sure you could. But I mean... rain. But to move on to the last Zelda game we haven't got to, Zelda Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is the game I used to shame other games for being bad. Because it ran on the Wii U. By current gaming standards, a weak system. I have yet to play a video game that looks better. I've yet to play a video game with more content that doesn't feel copy and pasted. I've yet to play a game that's cleverer. I actually really enjoyed the story of it by finding flashbacks to your memories before you were killed, and then avenging yourself. I really enjoyed the side characters. They didn't say a lot, but they said just enough to be my brofish bro, or that jerk Birdman who's Falco from Star Fox. They had just enough personality to actually be endearing. So literally any game I play, like any game, I'll be like, but was it better than Breath of the Wild? No, try harder.
Well, yeah, I mean, you definitely had this rant before where it's like, Metroid Dread is the same price as Breath of the Wild was. And it's like, that's not really price to content ratio. It just doesn't match.
Right? Like, for example, The Witcher 3 probably had more content than Breath of the Wild. That's fair. That was a truly impressive, voice-acted, giant super game. But one can argue that Breath of the Wild was prettier and ran on weaker hardware.
And then also, like, it has so much depth to the mechanics and the things that they could do, the ways you could interact with the environment. It was...
You followed the wind blowing...
interacted with you.
You followed wisps of fire being blown off a torch to get through a forest maze. I threw a metal boomerang at during a thunderstorm and was able to get a lightning bolt to be drawn by my boomerang to hit my target. No video game has come close to what I call good physics. Lots of games will put in physics engines that try and be accurate. We don't want that. We don't want things to work like they'd work in reality, because reality is boring and lame. We want things to work like they would do in a movie or in our imagination. In reality, you're not going to throw a metal sword and drag a lightning bolt down to hit your target. But in your dreams you will, and that's what games are supposed to be. So I don't want to play a game where, because I got covered in shit, the enemies are swarming me because I smell like fecal matter. I want to play a game where I can hold my ice sword in the desert and it keeps me frosty.
Oh yeah, or you hold the fire sword in the tundra and it keeps you warm.
Or you use your fire sword to kill a boar and it gives you cooked meat. That's not how anything should work, but it's how we want it to work. So, with Breath of the Wild 2 being constantly teasing the peripheral, I feel like we're going to have a Majora's Mask situation where it's debatably better or worse depending on which side of the spectrum you're on. But I don't think it's going to be better. I think it's going to be a sidestep, because, quite frankly, Breath of the Wild is hard to top. There's a bit where I walked along a river, found an axe embedded in a tree, chopped down a log, and the currents dragged it across to make a bridge. I learned this in my third playthrough of this game. I did not know this was a way to cross that river. Nowhere does the game tell you to cross the river, cut down the tree like most games are known to do. It was a thing I found by complete happenstance on my own. I'm pretty sure you're actually supposed to use the ice spell to cross, in retrospect, but I used a log and a current, and they gave me the tools to do it, and it worked how I would have wanted it to in my heart, not how reality would have made it, and that's peak video gaming.
I mean, Breath of the Wild definitely is the most ambitious Zelda game that they've made,
and is quite frankly
I don't think it's without flaws. I don't really want to get too much into what I consider to be the flaws at this point, but it was definitely an excellent game that is worth playing probably multiple times. Although not completionist, I don't know.
Yeah, you need to complete it once. Let's be real. And with that,
I never actually completed it because I just got frustrated with that particular aspect of it.
But you definitely got your $80 worth. You definitely played it enough to justify, if it was $5 to rent for a week, does this entertain me for 2 months?
Yeah.
And it's probably in my fourth favorite video game ever made. If I were to actually come up with a list. But with
that, we should move on to our random questions of the week.
Yes, so for those who are up to date with episodes, or for you weirdos who took a 10-episode break and are tuning in now because, Zelda, we have decided that the Dragon Question of the Week has run its course. We are out of specific Dragon-themed questions. However, we are putting out a survey to find out you, our listeners, what you would like to see in your ear holes in future episodes. You can vote for what genres you like more. You can vote that I'm clearly superior to Karl, and you can suggest topics and questions for future episodes. And with the survey,
I think the current survey is that we should do a cooking episode, but I think the numbers might be a bit skewed at this point.
And with that, we will still go into our random question of the week. Random question of the week. Vamping with song while I look for my list. Somewhere on the desk under my root beer float. Here it is. Alright, our random question comes in from an anonymous viewer. What is the quickest way for you to lose respect for someone?
The quickest way for me to lose respect for someone?
Man, if you're answering on my behalf, you already know the answer. But for you, let's find out.
Well, I mean, so if you don't want to be friends with someone, that's fine. You don't have to be friends with them. But when you go out of your way to, let them know, I'm not your friend anymore, and then you just kind of keep contacting them to let them know that you're not their friend. It's I just don't like that kind of harassment. When you stop being someone's friend, it's okay, you're done being their friend. Now you can just let them live their life. And
the
you
quickest
live
way
your
for
life.
you to lose respect is when someone leaves your life and then reminds you they left your life repeatedly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Good to know. Yeah, you're out of my life. Just wanted to let you know. Never.
What's the quickest way for you to lose respect for someone there, Richard?
Alright, first I'm going to give the kind of joke answer, then the serious one. The answer you would guess would be to lie to me about Smash Bros. Facts. But in truth, the quickest way for me to lose respect for someone is how they treat other people. So, if I'm friends with, say, Mr. X, and then Mr. X slaps his wife, I'm done with Mr. X. Just straight up. So, if someone brags to me about mistreating other people, instantly lose respect for them completely.
That definitely makes sense.
But, don't lie to me about Smash Bros. Facts.
Well, yeah, you get willed out of existence, because...
That's one of my powers.
I mean, everyone knows you can't flip over those little triangle pieces in the Smash Bros. Ball stage creator.
If you could, I would have already. Clearly. With that, thank you everybody for tuning in. Feel free to click the survey link that'll be in the description of the episode. bit.ly/Deep Space and Dragons. Capital all those proper nouns and transitions. And have yourself a legendary day, or night, or twilight.
Well, and if you feel like you want to enjoy some more of our content, we do also do live streams on Twitch and then post the streams onto YouTube once a week. We're currently doing those on Tuesdays in the afternoon. But time is non-linear, so that might shift. Who knows? But I really hope you have a legend. Wait for it.
Dairy
Day.
Bye.
Bye.
Man, we nailed that ending.